Good morning. Make sure we're still morning. My name is Bruce Green. I'm a volunteer here at the museum, and I was a school teacher for a number of years. And I'm going to talk about propaganda during World War II today, and a lot of people say I spread a lot of propaganda, but they generally don't use that term for it. So bear with me. I am going to try to show you a few clips of things as we go. I'm not the most tech-savvy guy in the world, but I did learn how to embed a video into a PowerPoint program while doing this, so I'm making progress. So I've got to turn this on, see what that says. What is propaganda? Well, it is biased information. What's the purpose of it? It's to shape your behavior and your opinions about things. Okay, that says that there. How does propaganda work? Well, there's a lot of things involved in propaganda. It can be put forth in a number of different ways. And you see examples up here. It can be some of these, it could be all of these, it could be one of these, but a lot of times it involves half-truths, lies. Sometimes it's the truth. Sometimes it just omits certain information, keep you from knowing certain things. Sometimes it'll simplify a more complex issue. Sometimes it plays on your emotions. Sometimes it attacks others. We see a lot of politicians use that method. Sometimes it targets a specific audience. So there's a lot of ways propaganda works. And governments have become, and militaries and so on throughout history, become pretty good at learning how to use these things. Propaganda has been around for a long time. The origin of the word comes from the Congregation of Propagating the Faith, and it was from a group of Catholic cardinals established this congregation in 1622 to spread or to supervise the spread of missions around the world. But the word propaganda came from this, and this was during the Counter-Reformation period. But a lot of people have used it. Genghis Khan used propaganda. He used to send riders into a city before he attacked it, and for them to spread the rumors about how large his army was and what danger these people were in. And a lot of times people would hightail it out of the city before they got there, and they didn't have to fight as hard. That's propaganda. The Roman Empire used it in a lot of different ways. Coins, putting the dictator's heads on a coin. You ever heard of breads and circuses from the Roman Empire? They built all these big arenas and theaters and racetracks, and they would pass out food. It was called the breads and circuses. Feed them and entertain them, and they'd forget about their miseries. That was propaganda. They used oratory and literature and poetry and a lot of different things in propaganda. The Reformation, both Catholics and the Protestants used propaganda. And, this is about the time the printing press is coming around, so propaganda expands to written materials. But it's been used throughout history by governments, politicians, religions, industries, to promote, persuade, attack, to get their message across the way they want you to receive it. I'm going to skip that one because there's a lot of information that we don't have time to go over. Methods of propaganda have changed throughout history. We talked about some early ways that propaganda was displayed. Well, here's some more recent, but not the most recent. Theater, plays, newspapers, leaflets, books, posters, and then comes radio and movies. They become a great tool for spreading propaganda. Today, if you own, I put my phone away long ago so I make sure it didn't go off or anything. But if you're carrying a smartphone, you're carrying propaganda with you all the time. Because everything we look at on there anymore is propaganda. Your computer, your television, we have smart televisions now. You see people, all these kids all the time with the earbuds in, and they got something playing in their ears all the time. You know, there's propaganda in our face constantly anymore. Now, the interesting thing, I took a course on propaganda last year from the National World War II Museum. And I've heard of algorithms, but I didn't know anything about them, and I still am no expert on algorithms. But I learned more about how come I see all these things on my computer. Because they've got programs that are trained to send you more of what you look at. And the more you look at it, the more extreme it becomes. So people are getting extreme views of things and they don't even realize it because of the things they continue to look at. Now I learned this, you can train those algorithms, but that's a whole different program. But you can train them by looking at the opposite things. And then all of a sudden that extremism comes down that you're seeing. But so many people today are seeing extreme things because these algorithms keep sending it to you. And that's, like I said, I'm no expert on that, and I don't know how it all works, but I know it's true because I see it on my own stuff, and I'm sure you do too. All right, we're going to start by talking about propaganda with the Axis nations, and we're going to talk specifically about Italy and Germany. Italy. Benito Mussolini wrote the political and social doctrine of fascism. And he said, for fascism, the state is absolute. Individuals and groups relative. Individuals and groups are admissible insofar as they come within the state. So the state comes first. And he used a lot of different methods of propaganda to get that message to people. Now, you're going to see a lot of similarities between these nations and the methods of propaganda that they use. And they all had somebody in charge of propaganda. They had departments. They had an organization within their government that was their job. Your job is to spread propaganda and make sure that people are supporting us and our cause. In Italy, that guy was Dino Alfieri. He was the Secretary for Press and Propaganda in Italy during World War II. And their goal was to make the Allied powers look weak against the Axis powers. And it specifically mostly targeted the United States and Britain with that propaganda. And Mussolini used a number of methods. He used film, art, books, photography, songs, posters, a lot of different things. He used the fasces, which was a symbol of power from the Roman Empire. He would put that symbol on a lot of things. So, a lot of things they're doing is propaganda, even though people don't realize that's what it is a lot of times. So we'll look at a couple of examples of Italian propaganda. These are posters. This one shows Churchill and Roosevelt, and it says the blame's on them. Here's Roosevelt with bombs raining down on an Italian city, and it shows Roosevelt laughing. Talking about his virtues. And over here is a racist propaganda poster from Italy, showing an African American soldier stealing the Venus de Milo. Some others, and you'll see themes of these things as we go. Working industry, working for the cause. That's going to be a common theme among all these nations. This one, defend your Italian children from communist Jews and Freemasons. Over here, about not spreading rumors. Don't let secrets out. Keep quiet. Another common theme we'll see. Japanese propaganda. Now, Japan focused a lot of their propaganda more on self-sacrifice, on their own nation, heroism, martyrism, instructional messages about how to take cover in case of a air raid, things like that. But they did also have propaganda that demonized the United States. They were telling people that the United States was trying to destroy their culture and to dominate them. Another thing, though, you'll see with Japanese propaganda is they were convinced that they were racially superior to the Chinese, to the Koreans, and to other Asian peoples. And this example shows you that they were trying to get the Chinese and Manchurians to support Japan instead of fighting against them. You know, let's be united. Here's one about increasing war production, another common theme. Luxury is our enemy. You know, be willing to do without things during the war, another common theme you'll see within nations. Fire and never quit. Join the young men's military brigade. Here's a recruitment poster for pilots. You know, again, some pretty common things you see among nations during World War II. A movie poster. This is from the story of Tank Commander Nishizumi. He was a tank commander on the Chinese front. And they made this movie to portray him as this great hero to encourage others to join the military and to become a part of this. And then leaflets. A lot of countries use leaflets to drop from airplanes onto places during the war. This is a leaflet that was dropped on the Filipinos in the Philippines, warning or telling them, the Filipino people, you should join the Japanese military rather than fighting against them and waiting to die. You know, so again, these are all methods of propaganda. Here's a couple that show the United States as evil. Roosevelt in both of these looks very evil, and you see him here as a puppeteer. So, you know, they did have their propaganda that attacked the United States. And we've got examples of propaganda throughout our museum. Well, we've got one similar to this in one of our cases here in the World War II gallery. Japan did have an Office of Public Information that was created in 1940 in charge of propaganda, like many of the other nations. Tokyo Rose. Now, Tokyo Rose wasn't really a specific person. Tokyo Rose was a group of English-speaking disc jockeys, female disc jockeys, on American radio. They would send out to in the South Pacific that American soldiers could pick it up. And they would try to demoralize the American troops by spreading rumors. You know, she would say things like, your girlfriend back home is cheating on you. And she tried to get in their heads, you know, but she wasn't really an individual. However, there was an individual that was arrested and tried and found guilty of treason. Her name was Midori Aquino. And later, in 1956, she was paroled, and in 1977, Gerald Ford pardoned her. And I don't know all the story behind it, but the fact that she was prosecuted as the specific person when it was actually a whole group of people. So, but this is her. I'm just going to play a little clip. This is what she might have sounded like on the radio. The guys are listening for the music and so on, but they're getting these propaganda messages from Tokyo Rose as they do. All right, German propaganda. Germany used a lot of forms of propaganda just like other nations did. Hitler started with propaganda even before he was in charge of the government. In 1924, he wrote this. Propaganda's task is not to make an objective study of the truth. Its task is to serve our own right, always and unflinchingly. So, I mean, he came right out and said, you know, we're going to lie to get our way. And then he wrote Mein Kampf in 1925. The whole thing was propaganda. You know, it was his views his political ideology and views for Germany's future. And it included a lot of anti-Semitic propaganda. When Hitler ascended to power, he appointed Joseph Goebbels as the Reich Minister of Propaganda. He served in that role until the end of the war. Goebbels controlled every part of media, including radio, movies, books, posters, newspapers, magazines. All of the forms that were available at the time were under the control of Joseph Goebbels. He made this statement: if you repeat a lie often enough, people will believe it, and you'll even come to believe it yourself. Some other things he said. Arguments must therefore be crude, clear, and forcible, and appeal to emotions and instincts, not the intellect. Truth was unimportant and entirely subordinate in his tactics and psychology. Goebbels said this: think of the press as a great keyboard on which the government can play. He also said this: propaganda must facilitate the displacement of aggression by specifying the targets for hatred. And he said this: the rank and file are usually much more primitive than we imagine. Propaganda must therefore always be essentially simple and repetitious. You know, so he had a plan, and he implemented that plan, and it worked to a great extent. German propaganda focused on, again, the same things others: industry, youth, taking care of, making sure we got enough food and war products, and joining the military and being patriotic, all these things. And they used posters and movies and newspapers and books and all the things the other nations were using. Early on, well, here's some examples. The enemy sees your light. So blackouts, a common thing, we use that propaganda in our country. Build weapons for the front, again, industry, a common thing. Youth, here's 3 posters encouraging youth to participate in the war effort. Youth serves the Fuhrer, all 10-year-olds into the Hitler Youth. Waste paper collection, German students fighting for their leaders and their people. Some others, here's one about women in the air raid protection program. Victory for Europe, victory for Germany is freedom for Europe, and then why we fight for our children's bread. You know, again, playing on people's emotions and their patriotism. Now, one thing that Germany did that you don't see in all of the other nations, now Italy did some of this as well, with the anti-Semitic and propaganda that led to the Holocaust. And it starts early on in Germany. And the propaganda included all the methods we talked about before and some more. Propaganda against Jews created an atmosphere of hatred, and it created an atmosphere tolerant of violence against Jewish people. So going all the way back to the Nuremberg laws of 1935, which singled out Jewish people and who was a Jewish person, and Kristallnacht, and these things were allowing violence against Jewish people. Jews were often portrayed as subhuman. You know, you see in these in this poster, behind the empty tower of the Jew. And this is from a movie called The Eternal Jew, and it created the aspect or the projection to people that Jewish people were evil. But not just Jewish people were persecuted in the Holocaust. Here you see a poster from Germany that says, The hereditary ill person will cost our national community 60,000 right marks over the course of his lifetime. Citizens, this is your money. So, propaganda against the disabled. And they were victims of the Holocaust as well. Some other things that were German propaganda during the Holocaust. This is a child's game. It's called Jews Out, a board game. This is a child's school book called The Poisonous Mushroom. And it portrayed the evils of Jewish people. And it even would throw out propaganda that you can tell who a Jewish person is by the shape of their nose and such nonsense as that. This is a poster from the Nuremberg Law that described who a Jewish person was. And it was based on your family tree and how many grandparents were Jewish and that kind of thing. So this described who was Jewish and who wasn't. And then there were ghettos that were created, and I'll get into that in a little more detail here, and ghettos and concentration camps, and propaganda played an important role in those things. Beginning in 1941 in Germany, Jewish people had to wear a yellow star on their clothing to identify them. It was law. Then in 42 and 43, in the other countries that Germany occupied, they had to wear the yellow star. Now, they forced you to wear this yellow star, and then they put up posters like this one that says, whoever wears this symbol is an enemy of our people. So if you put this poster up, and you make people wear this star, guess what that subjected them to? Exactly. So propaganda led the people of Germany to buy into this hatred. This is an announcement that was posted, and it's very deceiving because it's telling the Jewish people of this community, of the Lobos Ghetto, you're going to be resettled for work in another community. So they were told to gather their things and go to the train station. And instead, where were they taken? They were taken to Kelmno, which was one of the 6 killing centers in Poland. And then on the gates of all the concentration camps, this phrase is there, Arbeit macht frei, work makes you free. That's propaganda. Even in these camps, right up to the last minute, in Auschwitz and the killing centers, they were built to look like shower rooms. They would go in and they would tell them to take off all their clothes. They had pegs on the walls to hang their clothes on. They even had a sign outside the gas chamber that was made to look like a shower room. Remember where you hang your clothes. Right up to the end, propaganda. Now, I told you about Theresienstadt. It was the ultimate propaganda stunt. The International Red Cross was going to visit. There was a lot of word out by 1944 about these camps and the evil things that were happening there. So they send out, the Red Cross says, we want to come in and see. We want to see for ourselves. So the Germans created Theresienstadt, or they did what they call a beautification of it. They brought in all these children, they taught them songs, they even put on plays. I actually met a lady that was in Theresienstadt a few years ago who was a child, and she performed in the play that they did there. And they had coffee shops, and they had a garden. So when the Red Cross comes in, they're seeing this community where there's people sitting in a coffee shop. They're seeing these children sing songs and perform a play. They see things, there's a garden out here, and they're raising their own gardens. So when they leave, they report back, no, they were treated pretty well there. Shortly after the Red Cross left, 34,000 people from that camp were sent to Auschwitz and gassed. That was all for propaganda. All right, now we're going to get into Allied propaganda somewhat. And you see all of the Allied nations flags here on these posts, you know, calling for unification for victory against the Axis nations. So we'll start with Britain. The British, like all the other nations, formed a Ministry of Information. They were in charge of propaganda. They had one during World War I. It went away. They recreated it for World War II. And it was all to encourage people to support the war effort. And they used the same methods everyone else did that we talked about already. I won't keep naming all those things for you. But you see some examples, very famous examples from British propaganda. Now, they were being bombed during the Blitz, you know, and every day being bombed. So they had these signs around, very famous signs. If you go to England today, you're going to see these in all the souvenir shops. Keep calm and carry on. This one, very famous, supporting the RAF, the Royal Air Force, because of their defense of England during this time period. This famous statement made by Churchill: "Never was so much owed by so many to so few." And other examples, here another common thing, the blackout. Open your door to passers-by during an air raid, they need to be sheltered. And I learned this at the Imperial War Museum in London a few years ago. Some of you probably knew this, but in the Imperial War Museum, they had this steel thing that looked kind of like a phone booth. It was steel, had a little door on it, and it was a bomb shelter. They had them on the corners. So if you happen to get caught on the street, you could jump in that and try to protect yourself. So there's a lot of propaganda here encouraging people to continue to fight. And it couldn't have been easy. I mean, think about the continuous bomb. Other examples, encouraging women during the war effort. Come into the factories, women industrial workers. Every woman not doing vital work is needed now. There was an organization called Women's Landing Army doing the farming, because most of the men who had done the farming were in the military. Caring for evacuees is a national service. You know, women care for the children that maybe were abandoned or parents were killed. Some children were sent to the countryside, out of the cities, out of harm's way, and they needed people to care for those children. Some other common things from the British, careless talk. Beat them, here's one I like. We beat them before, we'll beat them again. And then some about children. I just mentioned that the children were often sent to the countryside out of harm's way during the bombings. There were posters up, "Leave Hitler to me, sonny. You ought to be out of London." And here's one with Hitler whispering in the mother's ear to take them back with her, take them back. And it says, "Don't leave them where they are." And then children helping with the victory garden. Soviet propaganda. It changed during the war. They had a propaganda body called the WWII. And its function, like the others, was to control all of the media and the things people were seeing. But you know this, that in the beginning of the war, after the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, propaganda from the Soviet Union supported Germany and praised Germany. And the Soviets, the government and Stalin, they actually had to really sell that to the Soviet people, because there was no love lost there. So their propaganda was selling, we need Germany. Germany's doing a great job. And then in 1941, that changes with Operation Barbarossa. When Germany attacks the Soviet Union, all of a sudden propaganda switches, and it attacking Germany now. And that's when they joined the Allied nations. So Soviet propaganda did switch, but you see some examples of Soviet propaganda here. Napoleon was wiped out, Hitler will be too. Don't talk again, common theme. Patriotism, the motherland is called. Examples of Soviet propaganda, industry, war industry, women helping at the front lines. Again, some pretty common things in Soviet propaganda. All right, I'm going to try to play this little clip for you. This is from the United States. This is a propaganda piece from a short film called Conquered by the Clock from 1943. It's about war industry. about 10 or 11 minutes long. But you see it supporting the war industry for the most part, which was a vital part of the things this city did. You know, and a lot of cities participated in that. And this is a propaganda film to encourage those things. And American propaganda during World War II was used for the same reasons other nations, to increase support for the war effort, to get a commitment for Allied victory, encouraging people to do a lot of things like raise a victory garden, work in the war industries, sell war bonds, buy war bonds, all be patriotic, join the military, any of the things that all the other nations were doing. Patriotism was often a central theme in the propaganda, especially in the campaigns to sell war bonds and such. Oftentimes the Axis leaders were portrayed as foolish, idiotic looking in American propaganda. The United States organized the WWII, Office of War Information. It was the propaganda division of the government, and it was in charge of all the things like the other nations, books, pamphlets, films, and so on. One of the programs that they initiated was called Kids at War and Schools at War, encouraging school kids to do their part, school age kids to do their part in the war. This poster for the Schools at War program, schools were encouraged to have scrap drives and sell war stamps. You know, a kid might not be able to buy a war bond, but if he might save his change, he'd be able to buy a war stamp. So they would save the stamps, buy the stamps, and when they got enough stamps, then they had enough to get a war bond. And kids did that regularly in schools. They organized scrap drives. You know, they did things like learning to identify enemy planes and such. And then there was a program called Schools at War, where it was a bond drive program to sell war stamps and war bonds enough to buy a Jeep or an airplane. And it would tell the kids, you know, this is how much you need to be able to buy a Jeep for the military. This is how much you need to raise. This is how much you need to raise to be able to buy a Piper Cub for the military. But these were popular programs in the schools during World War II. This is from the same campaign. And then there was a program called A Victory Farm Volunteer. And the school principal, it says, see your school principal, about being a farm worker. So encouraging school kids to help on the farms. So these programs were geared toward children. This book was called A Wartime Handbook for Young Americans. And it promoted supporting the war effort. Here, raising a victory garden. It also talked about buying war stamps and war bonds and all the things about being a patriot. And then they issued these posters and that would show the diagrams of the outlines of enemy planes so they could identify them. Now, sometimes things like this will scare kids. You know, if you think about that, and you're telling your kids, look out for these planes, and guess what, when they go outside, what are they doing? So a lot of times it instills some fear in them. But these were all programs geared toward kids during the war. Women during the war effort. This is probably the most famous World War II propaganda poster. Rosie the Riveter. Here are some other examples. Now, Rosie the Riveter represented the female industrial workers in this nation during World War II. Let me just give you a little bit of statistics here. More than 6 million women worked in war industries during World War II in the United States. 3 million volunteered with the Red Cross during World War II. And over 350,000 served in the military during World War II in different jobs. So women's roles in the war were vital in winning the war effort. And there was propaganda promoting such. You know, Sheila Wow, a worker, a women's ordnance worker. Women in the war, we can't win without them. Volunteer for the Red Cross. You know, Army nurses are needed. Here's women in the military. Now, this isn't necessarily propaganda, but I threw this in because I was looking at some of this stuff, and I found that Gertrude LaValle, who was a WASP pilot, the Women's Air Service pilot, Donna did a program about them recently, but her quote I like because we go to P-47s here. She said, the P-47 was my baby. It was just so easy to fly, it was fun. Race was an issue in the United States before and during World War II. So the government knew that, and they knew that it was necessary to encourage everybody to work together during the war effort. Even though there was segregation in most of the United States at that time, overwhelmingly African Americans participated in the war effort, in war industry and in the military. And they kind of had double motives for that. One, they wanted to defeat the Axis because they were Americans. But two, their hopes were that after victory, they would be given the same rights and freedoms as everyone else in this country. They called it the WWII campaign, double victory. But the government was aware, so they created propaganda as such. United we win. This is a political cartoon by Dr. Seuss. And it says, if you want to get harmony, use the black keys as well as the whites. And then this one says, twice a patriot. Obi Bartlett lost an arm at Pearl Harbor. Came home and worked in the shipyard during the war. This is a poster that promoted the Double Victory campaign. The government didn't actually issue these, but they were issued by other organizations and African American organizations to promote that belief. Buy war bonds. This is a movie poster called The Negro Soldier, and it was about Joe Louis, who served in the military during World War II. These cartoons, the government actually hired Charles Austin, the cartoonist, to create these and then send them to African American newspapers around the country to promote the war effort. And not all race issues were related to African Americans during the war. Japanese race issues also existed. We were attacked by the Japanese at Pearl Harbor. But we also had a number of Japanese Americans living in our country, especially in the West, on the West Coast. So this was not uncommon to see things like this. There are a number of variations of the Jap hunting license. This is, again, another Dr. Seuss cartoon, but you see the Japanese people lined up picking up TNT, and a guy looking out says, we're waiting for the signal home. So, it's kind of a racist, antagonistic cartoon toward Japanese Americans. And of course, you all know that many Japanese Americans were interned in camps during the war. So, it was a delicate issue at that time because we had been attacked by the Japanese, but not one of our proudest moments as a nation of things we did in that respect. We used a lot of different areas of propaganda, like we talked about before. It's a real war job, all you can do. This was always one of my favorite places to have this hanging up in my classroom. Use it up, wear it out, make it do or do without. Careless talk kills. Loose talk, again, encouraging people to not spread rumors or tell things. Saving waste paper. Fighting for our freedoms. Here you see a Nazi boot crushing a church, or religious freedom. Some geared toward children here, like save your child, keep your child, you don't want him wearing this Nazi hat. Here you see that 3 Axis leaders. And then there's a whole list of things I'm not going to read all that to you, but don't be fooled, this is what Hitler wants you to believe. Hollywood got pretty heavily involved in the war effort during World War II. And the Hollywood Canteen was started by Betty Davis and John Garfield. And it was open from 2 o'clock to 8 o'clock on Sunday and from 7 o'clock until midnight the rest of the week. And it was manned many times by Hollywood stars and celebrities. They would come in and serve the meals and things like that. They served more than 4 million soldiers from that canteen during World War II. And it was one of the few canteens in the U.S. that was integrated. Now, Evansville can be proud of this because the canteen we had here that served over 1.6 million meals to soldiers during the war also was one of the few that was integrated during the war. Celebrities also were involved in USO tours, in bond drive tours. They would go from city to city. There are a number of examples of celebrities coming through Evansville during the war and encouraging people to buy war bonds and things like that. A lot of different items were used as propaganda. You know, here's some matchbooks that were used. Toys, playing cards, scarves, pennants, license plates, a lot of different things here that just an ashtray, you know, that were used as propaganda. Stephanie, where's your hand, Stephanie? Over in the corner. These are things from her personal collection. She had a display in here during our anniversary weekend of a lot of her things. So I took pictures of them because they fit right in with what we're talking about today. These are children's clothing, you know, copies of military uniforms, toys, dolls, and paper dolls, and games and pens, compacts, makeup compacts. This is a bouquet made up of war stamps. Victory materials, these are from feed sacks. In those days, feed sacks were feed sacks were made of printed materials, and people would buy them and make clothing from them. So these are some that supported the war effort, the V for victory. And then these are the things that supported the war industry. You know, the gloves, work for victory, a banner you can hang in your home letting people know that I served in the U.S. war industry. So again, propaganda that came in all different forms and methods. Magazines were commonly used in propaganda. Here's a couple of examples, and you might be familiar with this one. This magazine is here in our museum in the home front gallery. It's from May of 1942 because there's an article in it called On the Home Front. And that article is talking about how people coped with life during the war, but it was about the Winhall family, a family from right here in Evansville, Indiana. Related? Okay. Awesome. So, you know, that was a kind of propaganda because it's encouraging people to do all the things, you know, and this is what everybody's dealing with. It's not just you. Everybody in the country is dealing with these things. And here's a Life magazine where they're encouraging women to become nurses. Nurses are needed. Other advertising. Sometimes advertisements like these were used to promote their products that were selling to consumers at the time. Schlitz beer. It says every fourth bottle goes overseas. So kind of a patriotic thing. Here you see all the soldiers drinking Coca-Cola. But not all of the war industries were selling to consumers at the time, like the auto industry. But they still advertised. Here's a couple of examples relating to Evansville. Republic Aviation, it says Evansville, Indiana, right there. Promoting the effectiveness and the use of the P-47 fighter plane during World War II. And that's an ad from a magazine. This one says, "Brother, I'm a one-man army." It's about a paratrooper jumping and going in to fight, and he's using a weapon that is using ammunition made here in Evansville, Indiana, at the Chrysler Ordnance Plant, the .45 caliber ammunition that was made here. So, not all advertising was done necessarily to promote a product that you could buy, but it was letting you know our industry is supporting the war effort. Leaflets were used. This is a copy of a leaflet. It's called the LeMay bombing, and it was dropped on August 1st, 1945 and it was dropped on cities, 33 Japanese cities, and it basically on the back told them, within a few days, there's going to be a bombing in Japan, and many people are going to die. It's a warning to get out of the city, because these cities are targets because they're industrial military cities. And shortly after that, the first atomic bomb was dropped. So I don't know, it's kind of a justification maybe by what we warned them, to drop leaflets on them. But that's one of the things we did as propaganda. Radio is probably the cheapest and most common way people got their information during World War II. Most people had a radio, or you had access to a radio. So that's how people heard things. And the news reporters of those days became like the most trusted guys. Edward R. Murrow and Walter Winchell. Just a real short clip here of Walter Winchell. Let me get a good play. Maybe we'll skip Walter. I don't know what I've done now. Going to the next one. No, I'm not. I'm programming.
Don't feel out confused.
All right, here we go. So anyway, radio, the news guys would tell you what's going on in the war as it came along. They also would radio programs, you know, that were popular entertainment programs. The guys that used to be bad guys and they were gangsters, all of a sudden became Nazis and Japs. So